We are in, I guess it is now segment 5. Yeah, segment 5 of our sheep camp series on Spike Camp. We're really lucky. We've had some really amazing guests on so far. We've covered all kinds of topics from, the provincial bios we're on. We had Bill Jex on giving us the kind of the perspective from his seat. We've had one of our buddies who's a big sheep hunter on talking about ultralight hunting. We've had the wild sheep guys on. We had Ray Weens on. Have I missed anybody? I don't think so. Not yet. And tonight we're really excited to have our buddy Dylan Eyers from EatWild. He's coming on to talk about meat care in the field, and in particular, how to handle and deal with a sheep in the heat of the summer. August is a challenging time for handling any animal, sheep especially in that kind of weather. So maybe we'll start off, Dylan, if you could give us a little quick intro and bio, and we'll let you take it from there.
Sure. Thank you very much. Nice to be here and nice to hang out with you. And really stoked about the Spike Camp initiative. I think it's great that we're, finding a place to have constructive dialogue within the hunting community, tell our stories, and do that in a positive way. And I'm really encouraged by the previous conversations that we've had around kind of making a place for folks to, feel more comfortable coming out and asking questions, and when they're on that learning journey to become a hunter. And that's largely what we do at Eat Wild. We're really about trying to make hunting a more welcoming and inclusive place for people to come and learn how to hunt and learn more about this way of life. Certainly you can all relate that the hunting community is maybe not the most welcoming place at times. And then there's a lot of learning that has to happen to become successful. So we've been at it for over 10 years, trying to figure out how to do that, whether it's, building field courses where we can help reduce the barriers for folks to learn how to hunt. And we do regular butchering workshops in Vancouver. Of course, we do the core class, and more recently, we've been building online courses and content because it seems to be obviously just a lot of opportunity there, and a lot of people are sort of switched on to the flexibility of online learning. So we've been building. We've got a school now, an online school of how to hunt, and was just working on our elk hunting, how to hunt elk workshop. But teamed up with Mike Bridger, one of the biologists up north, who's an excellent elk hunter and as part of his profession as well. So so trying to bring you that knowledge in a sort of digestible format, and with trying to keep the ego outside of the whole thing and make it fun and easy to learn, and hopefully get you fired up about learning how to hunt and having some success. So that's what we do, and so I'm happy to. We also have a podcast where we kind of share that same message and take you along on some of our hunts, and that's been a lot of fun. So happy to be here. So again, I'm really stoked that you're doing what you're doing, and excited to be talking about meat care. I think it's one of the things that we probably don't talk about enough as a hunting community. We spend a lot of time talking about gear and getting lightweight hunting and firearms, and like a lot of this talk a lot about elk calling and like a lot of things that are fun to talk about. But the end result for us all is that we're really here to try to come home with some amazing, quality meat and to share with our friends and family. And I think that there's certainly some tough lessons that I've learned along the way, and some things that I've tried that seem to work really well for, taking good care of meat. So I'll get into it if you give me the green light.
Yeah, that sounds good, Dylan. Really excited to kind of see your presentation and field some questions. And what we'll do is, if there's questions that pop up, you can probably see them on the screen. They'll pop up. We'll get Blake to read them out, and then we'll probably follow up after, because I know just from the last few that we've done, sometimes people can't make the podcast or the actual live stream. They can't attend it, so they watch it afterwards, and then they send us questions. So we'll turn it over to you. Let's see it.
Cool. Okay. Well, thanks for having me. So I'll jump into the presentation, and as we go here, I'm really please ask questions and drive some conversation. If you feel inspired, please drop something in the chat bar there, and look forward to trying to answer it. And let's see if I can get this presentation fired up. There it comes up again. Boom. Cool, folks. You see a picture of yeah, that looks like it's popped up there.
Perfect.
Yeah, it looks good.
Great, right on. Okay, so so we're going to talk a little bit about the 3 C's of meat care. So number one, I just came up with this. I just can't believe it just came to me in a moment. But the 3 C's of meat care, which I'll be going forward with this. But obviously, number one is keeping your meat clean. The second thing is keeping your meat cold, and the third one is critter free, and that includes bugs. So it was going to be CCB, and then I went with CCC because it's the 3 C's. So 2 C's and a B. Anyways, we're going to kind of come back to these 3 concepts as we go through this presentation. And it all seems pretty, well, you know what? Meat care is pretty simple, but there's a few real big screw ups that you can have along the way. This is an example of an elk that, we've, done a pretty good job of getting it off the mountain in manageable size pieces. We've hung it up on a meat pole. We've covered it in game bags. So we've kept the meat cold. We've got it covered in cotton game bags so we can breathe and keep the critters and bugs away from the meat. And this is going to be ready to go to the butcher. And for me, I don't really have a whole lot of, when I'm on a hunt, it's certainly great to have success when you shoot an animal, the animal goes down. I was like, okay, that's a big step of success being achieved, but it's really not the end point for me. The end point for me is sort of the point that I feel like cracking a beer and relaxing is when I look up at the meat pole and I'm like, all the work is done. That meat is taken care of. Like, you make such a huge commitment when you pull the trigger on an animal. And, I feel like I'm honoring that commitment. I'm honoring that animal right up until it's hung up on and taken care of, and there's nothing else I can possibly do to take care of that meat and ensure that it's great. This is a shot from our wedding last year. My wife and I, we got married. We got married last about a year ago. Just our anniversary is in a week or so, and we spent the whole year after we got engaged. We spent that balance of that year foraging and hunting and fishing for the food for our wedding. So we shot a couple deer. We kept the legs from those deer, and this is what we served at the wedding. This is our friend Jody, who's a chef, and we cooked the legs whole on a barbecue. Just so the flip flop method is kind of as a cool podcast a few back with a guy who called the flip flop guy that talks about how to cook a whole leg and flip it back and forth over the fire, and you just kind of slice off the seared meat on the outside and then marinate it and then flip it again, and just keeps kind of like a shawarma but with the deer leg. It was amazing. But for me, why I shared this picture is this is the most important day of my life and the commitment that I'm making to Mickey, but also to share this food with the people I care most about, and to know that I've done everything to take care of that meat so I can share it perfectly with my friends and family, on a special day. So to me, that's meat care, and that's the end result, and that's why, right? So I'll get into there's a few things here. So the keeping meat cold part is kind of the probably the thing I think about the most as I'm managing meat on any given hunt. And a few goalposts here. So one is that the body temperature of an ungulate, it runs at about 40 degrees Celsius. Oops. And then we're trying to get that temperature down to 4 degrees Celsius. So that's about fridge temperature. It's 4 degrees. If you can get something to sit between 0 and 5 or 6 degrees, there's the least amount of potential for bacteria to develop on your meat if it's 4 degrees. Anything that's over, anything that's over 6 degrees and upwards, bacteria will develop rapidly the warmer it is. And that's what really makes your meat go bad in field conditions. So if you've got moisture and you've got temperature, you're going to have bacteria growth, and you're potentially going to have spoiled meat pretty quick. And it doesn't take very long for meat to go bad, particularly if the temperatures are up. So there's a few things that you can do to manage when things are warm. And if you're a sheep hunter or a goat hunter or a mule deer hunter early season, and it seems to be even elk hunting now. Like the last few seasons we've been out elk hunting, we're constantly perplexed by the weather, as to whether or not we can shoot an animal because it's so darn warm these past few Septembers. So the few things that we'll do, and I'll show you, some slides on sort of my process for keeping meat cool. And number one is getting the guts out right away. And I'll come back to that in a couple slides, and I'll talk specifically about that, but I'll just quickly go through these. Getting the meat cooling, that's number one, and gutting is kind of first step in that. Breaking the animal apart into more pieces, so that like the bigger the mass of unit of the animal, the more heat it's going to retain. So if you take the guts out of it, you're going to take out 30% of the heat right away of the animal, because it's 30% of the mass of the animal, and you create a big cavity inside of it to allow for cooling. And then if you're dealing with hot weather, you're going to want to take the animal apart so that you have smaller pieces to cool down, and it should cool more rapidly. This is probably more relevant like on a moose or an elk, where you really got to think about if you're going to break apart the shoulders and open up the hips in hot weather. And then finding shade and wind. Wind is good because at least it can keep bugs off your meat, but it also can help that cooling process, and it also wick moisture off the meat, which is helpful. And then cold water is something that I've been using lately, and I'll show you some slides. And I don't see a lot of people talking about it, and I've been kind of working on my own process and troubleshooting using like cold streams and lakes as a means of cooling meat down in these hotter conditions that we seem to be hunting in every year. And I'll show you that as well. So number one rule, cooler, is less bacteria. So I'm a big advocate of getting the guts out right away, because the guts are about 30% of the body mass. So ultimately take that out, 30% less heat, and you create that cavity. I know a lot of people advocate for the gutless method because you can obviously break apart an animal without taking the guts out. It takes about 5 minutes to take, on a smaller animal like a sheep or a deer or a goat. It should, once you've done it a few times, it'll take you 5-10 minutes to get the guts out of the animal. So in my mind, getting that 30% of heat out of the body right away, it's such an easy win in this whole process of cooling the animal down, that why not just take the 5 minutes, get the guts out, and now you got a little bit more time to like carefully break that animal apart. For me, that's a good investment of time. I know some folks are probably, if you're working with two people that are really good at breaking an animal down in the boneless method, yeah, you can probably do that in half an hour. But most folks take an hour or longer to bone out an animal properly. And if you haven't done it a couple times, it certainly takes a while. So I would say get the guts out, and then that frees you up to take your time to puzzle out how you're going to break the animal down. So guts there. A couple other things to just keep in mind as you're kind of dealing with all this stuff is that don't forget that you've got a couple commitments to the regulations. One is leaving evidence of sex, so a piece of the penis attached to one of those portions you're going to cut off. And second one is leaving the tail attached to the animal. If it's a deer, if it's not any other species, you have to leave a patch of hair attached to one of the legs or somewhere that's an edible portion. So a bit tricky. This one has been a recent regulation change, leaving the tail on the deer, because they're trying to distinguish between white-tailed deer and mule deer, and they want you to leave the tail attached. So I got a little video, and I don't know if the sound will come through, but maybe I'll go ahead and run it. You guys can let me know if the sound comes through. Hang on.
I don't hear audio. I don't know, Blake, are you hearing it?
No, I don't think the audio's passed through.
Okay, I'll see if I can. It's not all that. So I think I'll just scroll through really quickly or grab some of the images. And yeah, I don't know if it gives me the option of. But the main thing I want to show you, and if it's relevant, is the trickiest part about keeping the tail attached is you got to leave the hide on, but you want to take the quarter off. And what I do, and I don't, can you see my cursor on this screen? Does that come up? Cool. So the first couple times I did this, I just basically cut around the tail and then left the hide on the tail, that the bony part of the tail, and then skin the rest of the animal. And I don't know if I'm curious if anybody has dealt with this, but they skin down the rest of the animal, and then you pop the leg off, and all of a sudden the tail falls off because
Yeah.
there's nothing attaching it to that main. It's just bone at that point attaching. So
It's definitely tricky. Yeah, you almost have to leave a little patch of hair attached to the tail and then subsequently attached to the quarter, right?
Yeah.
You kind of, yeah, I went through this 2 years ago, I think, with a little muley buck my daughter shot.
Yeah, so there's a shot of it there, just kind of leaving basically a little bit of a hide tag attached to the top of the rump that you're going to take with you with that quarter. Yeah, and then you can peel off the quarter, and you should be able to kind of just being mindful, take the sirloin, that top sirloin with you, then you should be good. And we've got a good trick is just to cover it up with a plastic bag so you're not getting a bunch of hair on your nicely done meat. So yeah. Oh, there we go. All right. So I was going to be talking about sheep care or sheep hunting and stuff. So I have a great example, field example of managing meat in the Alpine. This is a sheep hunt from 2 years ago. And I think we might have been in the heat dome back then. It was August 1st. I think a lot of folks dealt with the same struggle of heat. We had a really interesting hunt because we were able to be there early, and we had kind of gone up the hill. We got scouting, and there was 4 of us, and we kind of were base camp together, and we were going to split off each day and at least start the hunt that way. And our partners there, they walked. Well, for folks, it was their very first. Well, neither of them have ever sheep hunted before, but they're great folks and experienced pack crafters. So I teamed up with them, invited them along on this trip that I kind of researched, and anyways, they from our little spike camp in the past, they climbed up the ridge that they were going to go scout, and they went up about 25 minutes so where they could see a little bit of the ridge ahead of them. And they put their binoculars up, and they saw a ram skylined on the hill. And then they put the spotting scope on it, and it was like a no-doubter legal ram. So they watched it for the day, and then they came back down to camp like, hey, I think we saw a legal ram. And I was like, no way. Like, your first day ever of sheep hunting? I've been doing this for 10 years, and I don't think I've ever seen a legal ram that was just a total no-doubter. Otherwise, it'd be, I would have had a sheep by then.
Wow, that's crazy. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of it was quite a story too, because I was like I've dedicated my whole life to hunting. The last 10 years I've dedicated to sheep hunting. Had lots of awesome hunts. I've had lots of busted up hunts. I've looked at agonized over looking at rams that I'm like, oh, I'm sure that's 8 years old, but I just can't say for sure if it's full curl, and like, oh, I don't know if I can do it, and no, I'm not going to do it. And I passed on lots of rams that I wasn't sure about. So to like have your buddies like rock up the hill and be like, yeah, there's a no-doubter. And it was like, and they showed me the picture, and it's like 4 inches over the bridge of its nose. I'm like, oh man, I've been waiting for that opportunity my whole, for 10 years. And anyway, so we kind of struggled. Anyways, we went back up there the next day. We still had one more day to scout. So we went back up there to like double check that this was a legal ram. We were going to dedicate the day to it. And we're on our way up the hill, and my buddies were like, Dylan, like you planned this trip. I mean, this is your, like, you've done the research that maybe you should just shoot this ram. It's probably the right thing to do. And I'm like, I can't do that. I mean, this is, you guys found this ram, you guys do it, but I'm gonna pout for a bit. I'm gonna have a hard time with this emotionally. But
this is gonna hurt for a little while, right?
Yeah, I'm just not gonna be my best here for a bit, but I'm gonna get over it. So just bear with me. Anyways, we went out to the hill. We looked at this ram, and it's like, I looked at it through the binoculars at 400 yards. I'm like, yeah, that's a legal ram, right on. Okay, I'm gonna go pout over here on the other side of the hill. And I was on the other side of the hill, and I was pouting, and I put my spotting scope up, and I was glassing back over where we were scouting the day before. And there's a ram on top of a hill, and it might be 3 kilometers away, maybe more. And I could tell from that distance that it was a special ram. And I was like, okay, well, pouting's over. I've got a plan for tomorrow. So, and it was, I think it might be this ram in the middle here. It doesn't really show how heavy he was in this picture, but it was definitely a good hunt that we had the next day. But there was a couple that were going on for us on this hunt, and that's the ram there that we ended up climbing over to started up the day. Our partners went after their ram, and then we went after this other group of sheep that we've been looking at, Jenny and I. And we kind of knew that we had one day of hunting because like we knew that if they killed that ram, which they likely were, it was in a really good spot, that we had to leave that day. So we kind of knew we had one chance at this sheep, and it eventually came together. And if you want to hear the whole story, it's a great story. You should listen to our podcast on. I think it was can't remember what it's called, but it was a sheep hunting adventure, and it's a 2 or 3 part series. It's lots of fun. But we knew it was so super hot, and we'd have to leave. So we ended up shooting rams about an hour apart, and then it was just like mayhem to get these rams out of this conditions because it was probably 35 degrees on the side of the mountain, maybe hotter, which made for a very uncomfortable situation. But the good news is we had a bit of a plan, and I'm going to show you what our plan was as we go through. But first off, break the animal down into smaller pieces. So, I break the animal down into the 4 legs, the back strap, and then the rib meat. I take the neck meat off with the back strap. It's one whole piece, which kind of works well for hanging and just management. Anyways, initially, even though it's still hot out, it's enough of a breeze here on the rocks that some moisture is getting wicked out of the meat here. And at this point, there's no bugs because there's enough wind. If you have 10 knots of wind or something like that, you're going to have less chance of bugs being able to settle on the meat. But it's not a long-term solution because eventually that wind will die and bugs will get on it. So a couple shots here, and you can see me stuffing meat in my backpack. Now, one of the things I generally avoid doing when I'm in sheep country, or sorry, I should say grizzly bear country, is I'm trying to avoid like putting bloody meat into my bag. That includes putting bloody meat inside of a game bag and then dropping the game bag inside of my backpack. So I always bring a food safe, clear plastic bag with me for meat care. And part of that first step is to, instead of contaminating both my bag with blood and conversely, whatever bacteria that's inside of my backpack, that rotten old apple or the sausage that was in there from last year, and that finding its way onto the meat, I use that plastic bag as a clean system for managing potential bacteria. So taking the quarters, they go into the plastic bag that lines the inside of my backpack. That's step one. Now I know a lot of people say, "Well, never use garbage bags and don't use plastic," and I totally agree with that because plastic it's a vapor barrier. It doesn't allow moisture to leave the meat, which is a problem. But on the other hand, you're also dealing with bacteria like getting on the meat, and by eliminating bacteria getting on there in the first place, helps you reduce the potential for bacteria growth. So it's kind of a balancing act. And see here, oh, it's too bad the audio doesn't work because I was going to share with you. So we're all packed up and we're walking away fantastic. But the reality is that it's sorry, we're going backwards here. And I don't think this is allowing me to, not allowing me to, anyways. So Jenny's upset. She's not upset. She's just hot and buggy and heavy pack. And but there's no like, the other thing about meat care is that like, you kind of got to hustle. Like there's no like, shooting the animal and then kicking back and leaving a whole animal in the field while you suck up a few beers and a little bit of glory. Like you got to get to it and you got to get that job done. It goes back to that first slide. I'm like, I don't relax until the meat is hanging on the pole and we're done. So the in ideal conditions, and so there's the other option is to use game bags, but and absolutely they are part of this process because you need the meat you need to be able to hang meat and you need to be able to keep the bugs off it. And it's your best situations. If you're into cooler conditions, you can get that meat into game bags and then you can hang it up whenever you take a break and allow some air to get at it. So these game bags are by a brand named Huto. They make all like super light game bags. They're synthetic fabric that breathes just enough. It also retains like it doesn't like it seems to not drain a bunch of blood out, which is yeah. And
Dylan, just a
yeah,
quick question there. So you guys shot both those rams you said within an hour of each other on different locations. Did you guys debone all the meat before you packed it out?
That's a great question. So again, so it's a balancing act for me. So I leave the shoulder blade in and the hip bone in because I want to reduce the amount of flesh exposed to bacteria. Number one, I also like having that bone in there for hanging. You're gonna get way better yield when you butcher the animal at the end of the process if you leave that bone in. But the consequences is probably 3 to 5 pounds of extra bone that you're packing out. Now, for me, it's well worth it to do that because I want that 3 to 5 pounds of bone and possibly even less than that. You think about all as soon as you open that up, you have to trim all that away when you butcher it. So you're going to lose 3 to 5 pounds of meat for the extra trimming that you'd have to do inside of those, what are your premium cuts, particularly in the hind quarter, right? So I don't debone my quarters. I take out the back strap, obviously the tenderloins, but I leave the legs and the attached. I just don't think it's worth it for the effort. Maybe if you really wanted it, you could maybe pop off the front, like the shank. Maybe you can pop that bone out because you're just
Right.
But I think certainly that upper the femur, I'd leave that in there.
Okay, and then the second part to that question was, so there was 4 of you. Both groups ended up shooting a ram. Did you guys manage to pack both rams off in one shot? And assuming you were spike camp, so you didn't have all your gear with you, right, on top of the mountain.
Yeah. So we were rafting. So we were probably a 7-hour walk up the mountain from our rafts. And so we were camped at that pass. And then we're another 3 or 4 hours up onto the ridge where these rams were in different directions. So we ended up opting to do 2 trips down to the rafts with the rams because we just found that it was incredibly we were pretty beat. We took out every ounce of meat and the horns, of course, and then just for Jenny and I, that was pretty tough. And then to add our 35 pounds of camp on top of that, it just wasn't really feasible. The other reality is that we were on day 1 of a 10-day trip, so we still had 20 pounds of food each or something like that, or 15 pounds of food each, right? Yeah. So we had to get, we weren't going to just leave that out in the woods. We were going to bring that with us. We opted to do 2 runs. And I'll show you guys in a couple of slides what we did at the river as far as meat care.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I just wanted to share a couple of shots of using game bags as a part of this process. And under ideal conditions, if you got chillier conditions, a lot of people prefer to hunt sheep in September and October because the meat care is just so much easier. Then you can just bring a game bag and throw everything in, and you just hang it up on a rock and you're laughing. But if it's too hot, then I don't know what unless you've got a snowbank or something to throw it in. So there's that No Doubter ram that Spencer got, and you can see that it's it truly crosses the bridge of its nose. It's a unique ram. It's got a bit of a funny curl on it, but pretty cool.
Yeah, he looks like he took a hard left turn somewhere.
Yeah, it's actually a genetic thing. There's actually there's a few rams that as this got out in the community, other people had pictures, and it's actually a thing that happens to their horn configuration under certain conditions. So yeah, kind of cool. But this was a kind of a cool thing that they had a small sill tarp, and I typically have a sill tarp with me when I'm in the mountains for just emergency shelter. They just strung theirs up above the animals, so they're taking the sun out of the equation, which is allows them a little bit more time to do their thing, and go from there.
Well, and that would help with fatigue on the on the folks working on the animal too, right? With the sun beating down on your back, that's a great idea.
Totally, yeah. And I've never been so that where we shot our ram. It was just so hot and just in black rocks on the side of the mountain. It's just just so much heat. So this is the boys are taking a break, and this is actually a great shot here. You can kind of see what I was talking about. So there's your standard Kuyu game bag full of bits of meat, and it's saturated with blood at this point, and that goes into your bag. It doesn't I'm not quite sure what the perfect solution is to this, but I don't think it's this, because now that game bag is covered in bacteria, and it's holding on to all your meat that's got but and then it's going to go into your backpack, which then can distribute the blood into your backpack, which is going to cause its own problem. So where on the left at least there's the plastic bag. You open it up, you get some air on it, and then you tumble it back together, put it in your pack, and then you make that run until you have a long-term solution for meat care. And this was our long-term solution down at the. This was kind of our plan. This is how we knew we could manage meat. Is we had one little stream that was like draining out of a glacier above us. It didn't have a lot of water in it, but there was enough pools in it that we were able to take dry bags and those plastic bags and submerge them in the cold creek, which then sucked that temperature down to, sub 6 degrees temperature. And that was what really saved us for that first night, because I don't know quite what else we would have done. And we certainly wouldn't have made the commitment to killing 2 rams if we didn't have a plan in place. And this was our plan, like dry bags and clear plastic bags, and then this little river.
So Dylan, quick question then. I saw a thermometer early on in the presentation, but it looked like it was sitting in a hip bone of an elk.
Yeah.
Did you have a thermometer with you and measure the temperature on this trip?
No. And I think I quite like the guts. That was a new thing. That was actually the elk trip just after this trip that I brought that, because we had done this on this trip, and I was really pleased at how it worked out for the most part. Well, we might have had a thermometer in the boat, because I remember we were measuring the temperature down on the river. So yeah, we would have had it, but I don't think we had it up in the mountain. But yeah, I kind of like this. I like this idea because it's only a couple ounces for that thing, and it kind of creates a little bit of peace of mind. And
yeah, for sure, you could check on it, and when it hits that temp, then you could pull it out and put it in the bag and hang it in the tree or whatever, right?
Exactly.
Great
So you
idea.
kind of go back and forth. So I quite liked it in that sense. So, but yeah, in this case, we were just doing the best we can in this situation, and we kind of knew that the water was really cold, because we could see it melting out of the, like coming out of the ground. And in some cases, I mean, if we had a snow patch or something like that, which you often do in some sheep country, you could bury it in a snow patch. Unfortunately, those snow patches are often, kind of at the top of the mountain on the north side, and they're not the easiest place to get to. But nonetheless, this is life. This is a pretty awesome time. Just water, sheep over the fire, and now the rams are submerged in the water, and we're able to relax a bit and celebrate a little bit. And that's sort of there's meat kind of in the creek in plastic bags, and this is actually from a bear that we shot in the spring a couple years ago, when we first started practicing this and trying to figure out what works. And this was, again, like if you're hunting bears in the spring, it's can be 20-30 degrees, and this offers a solution to the same thing. So another thing you got to be super mindful of, whether it's the meat or the horns themselves, is you got to keep them up off the ground and do your best to tie them up into a tree. You don't always have a lot of trees to work with, but this is what we did with the 2 rams, just so that nothing came and dragged them off overnight. And even if it's a little critter, they can just drag it 30, 40, 50 feet to chew the meat off it. You may not find it in the morning, or worse yet, a bear comes along and grabs your horns or the meat, right? So, okay, so this is what we ended up doing. We ended up down at the river, and we had the benefit of larger larger dry bags here. So we piled all the meat inside the larger dry bags and tied the bags to a rope, and then submerged them and put rocks on them. And this was actually great. The river itself was warmer than it probably should have been, because it was it's so incredibly warm out that even the river was like 6 degrees or something. We were able to swim in the river after our sheep hunt, so that tells you a little bit about how incredibly warm it was. But it was certainly better to have it submerged in 6, 7, 8 degree water than exposed to 35-degree heat, or even 20 something plus in the shade, right? And you're also dealing with bugs as well. So this is Scott giving the meat the sniff test. So, monitoring the meat, you can tell a little bit. Certainly the smell is probably the thing that's going to tell you the most about whether the meat is potentially spoiling. But and also, if it starts to get sticky, that's not ideal. You'd ideally want to have your meat as dry as possible, cold and dry, and breathing if you can. So, and then this is kind of getting towards the so now we got to paddle our sheep out, and again we're looking for ways of keeping the sheep cold while we are transporting it. So we've tucked the meat underneath the right on the bottom of these pack rafts, which is and then that meat is sort of right up against the floor of the boat, which has got cold water running over it the whole time. And this did a really good job of keeping things cold. So there's a shot of the going down river, sheep in the boat, and then all the meat is underneath that floor of the raft, which made for a pretty great little cooler system. And in a pinch, that worked really well. So yeah, so that's sort of that's one story of how to manage meat in the alpine. So the question for me is like, what do what do you do if you're in an environment where it's 30 degrees, you're on a sheep mountain and you see a legal ram, but there's say no water, you don't necessarily have dry bags. Like what are you going to do if you see that ram and it's 30 degrees out and you got a 2-day hike to get out? Chuck, have you been in that situation or anything like that?
Yeah, actually, we were in the same situation with a ram probably 4 years ago now. It was hot. It wasn't quite 35 degrees, but we ended up shooting a ram. There was no water anywhere nearby. And basically, we just dealt with it as far as, trying to find, like you mentioned, wind and shade. And we did pretty much the same process. The only difference was the night that the ram was killed. Basically, right after the trigger was pulled, the it just started to rain and it poured. And by the time the ram was back at camp, it was like 1 or 2 in the morning. So basically, just hung it in game bags in the tree overnight, and then got up in the morning, stripped the game bags off, and dried it out as best we could and cooled it. The only, and for the most part, it worked well. The only issue we had was there was 3 of us on that hunt, and the two guys that were with me, the one fellow that shot the ram, um, there wasn't really good game bags other than the ones I had. So I had some meat in my synthetic game bags, and I think mine, I can't remember the brand name, but one of the reputable brands. The other ones were just plain cheesecloth, and we had about a 2-day pack to get back down to the river. And so but we spent the next day caping the ram out and dealing with the hide and keeping an eye on the meat in the trees, letting the wind cool it off, bagged it up. And when we got back to the river, I think it was like 2-3 days later, we noticed that the meat that was in the bags that were the cheesecloth ones started to get larvae on them. But the one bag of meat that had that was in the good game bag, we had no issues. And actually, what I had at the river is I had a little container of citric acid powder and a little spray bottle, and basically mixed up a little concoction and sprayed some of that on the meat that had the larvae on it, and it sort of contained it. But yeah, it wasn't ideal. It was a tough situation.
Yeah, it's not, and that's just it. It's not ideal, and like we all, and particularly in the sheep hunting community, like we make some pretty tough decisions about how far we go and what we're and at the end, I as much as I don't, I think the meat care to some degree becomes secondary to the hunt. And I do think that's unfortunate for me. Like I think that I think we all got to have a plan and have some a reasonable way of managing it. And I remember that we were pretty, what was surprising is on this hunt we felt like we were really pushing what I was comfortable with in terms of meat care. And the boys with their ram, they had one of their quarters start to kind of go a little bit on them, and you could kind of start to smell it, like you said, and we were able to get some vinegar on it to help sort of hopefully stem whatever bacteria growth and aging that was happening. And but all in all, we thought we were kind of right on the edge of potentially losing our sheep for what we were comfortable with, and we brought them into our there's an outfit in Fort St. John, and we kind of called Stan's Custom Meats in Fort St. John, and he's a hell of a good guy because we called them and we were in a panic, and we were like, hey, we're coming down from the north, and we've got a couple rounds I think are on the edge, and we really want to, like, is there any way you can help us out, get us in right away? And he's like, I'll open the doors at 7 a.m. if you can get here. So we basically drove through the night, got in to his shop at 7 a.m. He pulled everything in, he opened everything up, and he kind of looked it over. He's like, you know what, this is some of the nicest sheep meat I've ever seen, so I don't know what you guys are worried about. And that was comforting in the sense that we had, like, successfully, got our meat in and it was okay. The part that was concerning, though, is he sees like 20 sheep a year. And if that's the best quality meat, I don't know, because we definitely had a quarter that was on the edge of going, and but still, and it had been, riding out in the bottom of a boat for a couple of days, plus the hike and that heavy hot weather. But so I think that's definitely something that we have to talk about as community, and maybe there might be a point where you don't pull the trigger because you don't have a way of getting that meat home. But gosh, I can appreciate how hard that is when you put yourself in that position. And yeah,
Well, exactly. But when you think about it, right, Dylan, if you're on an elk hunt, say you're out there with 3-4 buddies, and you end up wandering a little too far and the weather gets too hot, you're probably not going to shoot that elk 10K from the river. For one, it's going to be a hell of a pack out. And two, you're not getting it out in one day. It's going to take a couple days to get it out. So if you use the same mindset with a sheep, it's probably a good rule of thumb. I know we saw it on the boat as well. We saw another group that had a ram on that same trip, and the bag of meat that they had, they pulled it out of their cooler. And that's the other thing they did, is they stuck it in a cooler at the river, but there was no ice in the cooler. And then I don't know where the decision making came into play, but they took their meat, threw it in the cooler, closed the lid, and then drank beer and sat around the fire overnight, and opened it up when they got on the boat the next day, and you could smell that thing from 50 feet away. It was horrible.
Yeah, it's remarkable, and it's that fast, and that's a great example of how quickly it can all go bad, right? So yeah, so I think ultimately, like, if you're coming back to the beginning of this, it's like it starts with a plan, and having a plan that you can trust that'll, at least you have a chance, or at least you got options if things go sideways, right? Like, there's always the option that someone's got to climb to the top of that mountain and go stuff this thing in the snowbank if the weather doesn't cooperate, or there's always the option of getting down the hill fast enough and getting into the creek, or there's always an option, and hopefully you get great conditions and you can throw it in a game bag, hang it from a tree, and it chills down to 0 degrees overnight, and it's gravy, because once you get that chill on the meat, like once, and I didn't really dive too deep into this, like I kind of later in the presentation, which I don't think we're gonna have time for, I kind of talk about hanging practices and such, but like if you get one good night of chill on an animal, you can hold the cold temperature inside of the meat as well. So if it goes down to 2 degrees or 3 degrees overnight, and you've got your meat hanging in game bags in your camp, it's going to get hot during the day. Well, you can throw all that in your pack, and maybe even insulate your pack a little bit with your sleeping bag and everything, so that coldness stays inside of your bundle of meat inside your backpack, and kind of hang on to it while you're traveling. And then when the sun goes down, or you get in the shade, you can break it all back out and get some air on it again and get the wind on it when you have those opportunities. So it becomes a bit of a game of, like, taking advantage of the cold moments and the wind and the shade, and trying to just keep the temperature going in the right direction, right? So
Yeah, I think the main message there is, get it cool as fast as you can, and then it's just a matter of maintaining the cool. And I've talked to guys that 2 guys will go out for a sheep hunt, a pair of partners. They'll shoot a ram on the first day, and then they want to stay up in the alpine for a couple days, and try and get a second ram. And it is manageable. I mean, we had Kevin Willis on. He talked about that a little bit. Same sort of idea. You just got to get it cool right away. Try to maintain some sort of cool temp with it at night. In the bush, in the shade, down by a creek, whatever you can do, and just keep an eye. I think the other thing you pointed out is that smell test. That's the big one, right? Like, as soon as you start to smell that off smell, it's going bad.
yeah, and it doesn't take very long for it to happen. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I probably won't jump too far ahead here, because I've got there's I got a bunch more slides, but I think I see that we're coming up to 8 o'clock, and we're going to try and do this in an hour. We do this course this is part of my online course kit. I've got a bunch of other ones here. I'll just stop sharing for a second and just get my presentation to a different spot here, but fun pictures though.
So quick question for you then. Where
Sure.
Those food safe bags, where does a person find those?
That's a great question. I actually, so I started out by I'll share these pictures. It's just kind of fun. We're talking so much about keeping me cold.
Sure.
I started out just by using like recycled bags because that was available and they're cheap. But we've been doing this for elk for a long time because we typically would shoot our elk within a 4-hour walk from where a road or a river or something. So I was comfortable like breaking the hind quarter off the animal, dumping it into a plastic bag. Then you can lay it on the ground. Oh, what the hell! I got the pictures right here, so I'll just show you.
Yeah, we're not all that pressed for time, Dylan. If you want to keep going, like we've got, what's our limit on runtime, Blake? We got 90 minutes, right?
Yeah, we have a total of 2 hours we can do, but it's totally up to Dylan how far you can go. So
yeah, you got as much time as you need, basically.
Oh, I'll just since you just asked about it, I'll show you. So yeah, breaking down big animals. This is a friend of mine that did not take our butchering workshop and didn't know how to break down this massive elk into manageable size pieces.
That's
so.
a massive elk. Very nice bull.
Very cool bull. And this is another very big bull from my dad many years ago. And you don't always have the help of a little mini excavator to help you process your moose. Sure is easy when you got one though.
Oh yeah.
Well, this looks more like what the situation when we're dealing with big animals when you got a 800-pound elk on the ground and you got to break it down into pieces. And so that's those plastic bags. So what I go to Uline. Uline has food safe grade like 3 mil plastic bags. They're heavy duty enough that you can tie a knot at the top and throw them in the creek and not worry too much about it rupturing, which is nice. And then as I peel off the quarters, I just throw a quarter into the bag. And this way I'm, again, it's like, I'm not getting leaves, I'm not getting grass, I'm not getting dirt on the quarter, I'm not contaminating in my backpack. And then these end up going like from my backpack into the bottom of the boat or into the back of the truck. Like the bottom of the boat is basically like sand, mud, and oil, beer, like
gas,
whatever.
Yeah.
So it's just not a food safe place. So at least you've got this system. I mean, obviously you'd put a tarp down, all that kind of stuff, but having that plastic barrier, I like it. For me, it's well worth it. And then this slide here is this is the moose we shot a couple of years ago, and we use the plastic bags just to transport the meat, and at the first available opportunity we transfer them into proper game bags. And as you mentioned, Chuck, like actually good game bags that don't have a fine enough weave in them that won't allow for bugs to get into them. I've been a cotton game bag person forever because my mom would go buy cheap white sheets and sew them up
bed sheets
into elk size quarters for me. The only thing is those bags are like, it's my game bag set is like 4 or 5 pounds for an elk. It's big, it's like quite a lot of fabric. So I have switched over to I don't know if I have some just sticking around here. The Huto guys make I don't know if I've got a set here or not.
Yeah, it's amazing. The technology on the game bag side of things has come a long ways. When you get into hunting gear, you kind of get into rabbit holes sometimes, and you just keep buying, the same device or piece of equipment over and over till you find what you like. And Blake knows this. I'm a game bag nerd. I've got literally every set you can find, from the ultralight ones from some manufacturers in the States to some of the Canadian made ones. The Born and Raised Outdoors guys came up with a really cool set that has a zipper on them, and they're shaped like elk quarters. So
no kidding.
Yeah, they are. They're really nice. So if you're doing an elk by yourself, you unzip it, you lay it down, and as you're cutting that quarter off, you can actually flip that quarter right onto the bag, flip the zipper over or flip the top over and zip it up. So I'm looking forward to trying that out this year if we shoot an elk.
Yeah. So I'm not I haven't really put, so these bags here, these Huto guys, they have, it's a synthetic fabric, and it's quite a tight weave. Like, it breathes, but it doesn't breathe like, cotton breathes. But it seems to be enough that I was surprised how well, like, we used them on a bear this past trip, and I was amazed at how much of the vapor got out of the animal despite being a relatively tight weave bag. But the benefits of the tight weave is that, like, the blood, it kind of doesn't really, like, just pour out the bottom. It seems to, like, I don't know, it seems to hold in until
Yeah,
you can kind of,
they kind of have a wicking or kind of absorption property to some of those bags, right? And it will sort
yeah,
of suck it right out. Yeah, it's really
yeah.
weird.
It seems to be like, I'm like surprised at how dry the meat is inside. I'm like, shouldn't there be, like, where did the moisture go? Was kind of my question as I was dealing with them. So I haven't really
Exactly.
used them enough to be like, soup, like, that they're better than cotton, but they are certainly, like, the package of game bags that I have is literally this big for an elk, and it's amazing, and it weighs a
Yeah.
pound. So I'm like, well, I can take that in the mountains with me, and that gives me, between that and a couple plastic bags, I got a ton of options for meat care, which to me that makes a lot of sense. And we're talking about a 2 pound package or something, which is great. So to me that makes a lot of
So
sense.
years ago, my old sort of moose hunting mentor, buddy of mine, put me on to citric acid. You can buy it at, I think, Bulk Barn or, some of the wine U brew places. And it's just like a powder. Have you ever had
Mhm.
any? Have you ever tried that? Have you ever used it before?
Yeah, I've used it a couple times, and I'm pretty lucky. Like, haven't I haven't had too many conundrums with, like, and again, I'm pretty, we've used a couple other things, like another big meat care things. We'll bring we'll bring a generator on our elk hunts, because again, we're dealing with hot weather. Our plan is to shoot the elk, bring it back down, hang it up overnight. Hopefully it's cold enough that we can get the chill on it. And then for the days where it warms up, we've dumped it into a freezer, and then we just freeze it. And then we thaw it out when we get home, and butcher it. So that's kind of replaced the need for me to really experiment with citric acid. Um, and I haven't really done, like, I do multi-day sheep hunts and relatively unsuccessful multi-day sheep hunts. So
Well, welcome to the club.
yeah,
You're one ahead of us, though.
yeah. And then my mule deer experience is really like, if it's too darn hot, I haven't shot it, and if I'm too far, and then if I'm I'm pretty comfortable, like, shooting an animal within 4 or 5 hour walk of where I have more options, whether it's a creek, whether it's getting into a cooler, whether it's anticipating cooler temperatures overnight. It's when you don't have a plan for the next day, and the temperatures come back up, and you're still a day away, and you got to fight trying to keep the temperatures out for a 12 to 15 hour day of 10 plus degree weather. I think that's where you're going to run into problems. And I actually haven't dealt with that too much, because I think I would just err on the decision of not pushing it, and I haven't had to break it up. But I've had a little jar of that in kicking around in the bottom of my hunting box for 25 years now, so it's good to know it works.
Yeah, it does work. I didn't really understand it when I was young, and like I said, my mentor, we were at moose camp every year, no generator or anything like that. And once the meat cooled down, he would mix this up in a little solution of water and just spray it on, and it just seemed to work. Like we never had any larvae or bugs or anything, but we were using the old cotton bed sheets. My mom used to do the same thing, make them for me, and it worked good. So I have a little package. I always leave it sort of at my base camp box or tote or whatever, and haven't had to use it in a few years. I was just curious if you tried it, but also curious if anybody out there who's listening tonight or following up, watching this later on in a few days, if any other tips or tricks would certainly be welcome.
Yeah, for sure. I have used, like, vinegar on meat and just giving things a wipe, particularly if you have a less than desirable shot, or you've had a ricochet or some bone fragments have pushed back into the stomach, and you got a little bit of rupture, and you just want to kill any type of bacteria inside the cavity. So I often you'll use white vinegar, just to wipe down the cavity, or any bloodshot meat as well, just to, yeah, reduce any sort of areas that's a high likelihood of bacteria to develop. So that would work in place of vinegar really well, and also a little bit more stable and lighter too, right? So
Yeah, for
cool.
sure.
I got a few more slides for you, and then we'll stop for some questions. And but yes, keeping meat cold. Like this is a perfect conditions when you can just throw a piece of meat in white powdery snow and have that chill started. There's a couple slides here from last year's elk hunt. This is our friend Jason that had an awesome hunt here, successful elk hunt, and we knew that we were fighting. And as you said, Chuck, like we were well farther than 10 kilometers into the woods when we got this elk, but our plan was to use the river cooling system, and this worked really well. We were able to put the quarters in. The river was between 4 and 7 degrees depending on the day, and just did a really good job of making sure we sealed everything up, and then they just soak it in the creek, and it was awesome. So we were able to test as we go. And it doesn't take very long once you're going. Another trick we have done over the years is another elk that we shot. It was very hot in this. This is actually a hunt that is a good example of maybe making that decision. This is we took horses in, and we had a trail of horses, and we rode in, and we camped at our main spot that we anticipated camping at the edge of this burn. And it was like 20 something degrees, and anticipating like a stretch of weather that was probably going to be warm for a bit. And I remember going out the first night, and I walked out, and there was I beagled once, and I beagled in two legal bulls came in, and they were coming towards me, and then they started fighting and hanging out. And so I was 150 yards from this big bull battle of 2 6-point bull elk, and I couldn't shoot him because I knew that it was going to be warm for the next pile of days. And if I shot either one of those, we'd have to literally turn around and ride back out the next day. And obviously we wanted to enjoy this experience a little bit, and we'd worked really hard to get the horses in there. So we ended up sitting around camp and just napping a lot and learning about how to take care of horses and keep them from running back to the highway for the week. And then eventually the temperatures dipped, and I went back out to the same spot and beagled a couple times, and one of those bulls showed up. So it all worked out for a successful hunt. This is a shot of us just using, like, ditching a couple quarters and just using our emergency blankets that you should probably have in your safety kit anyways as a sun reflector if you have to leave the meat in the sun. And this really helped. Just one other little thing to fight against the heat. Another thing we'll do is, like, if you do have to leave meat and you just want to hang it up, and hopefully you've got a game bag and you can leave it hung up high in the wind, and then you have to come back and get it the next day. Oh, this is our bear hunting expedition, and a warm hunt on the coast. And we used the Hutto game bags for this one. And there's kind of a handy that my boat served as a perfect little meat hanging tree. And we were able to get a nice chill on these overnight. We got the bear, got it back to camp, cut it up, hung them overnight when it was relatively cold, but still probably like 10 degrees, but better to do that. And then the next day we dropped those game bags inside of the plastic bags and then submerged them. And then that gave us that kept the chill off. So we spent the next day hunting a bit more and fishing, but we knew the meat was in good shape because it was sitting down in this creek that again was very cold and didn't have to worry about the meat. So pretty good setup for sure. Pretty simple. Yeah. Right on. Well, if you're interested in more of this stuff, and there's a longer series of this, you can I think we have a bunch of courses now on our website. There's meat care and e-scouting and how to sneak around in the woods and sneak up on animals. They call it still hunting. There's a still hunting workshop that's pretty fun. We're just finishing our elk hunting workshop, and I'll be working on my deer hunting online course over the next month. I hope we have it ready for the hunting season. So we're kind of investing time in that, and that's been fun. But we're still doing like in-person stuff. Like this weekend, we're doing our backpack hunter workshop. We're taking folks out to a pretty cool spot in the Alpine, not too far from Vancouver, and we show folks how to pack light, e-scout a good spot to get up into the mountains, how to work your way up from, logging, like a logging road or logging slash up into the alpine, and then how to find good spots to spot and stalk, and how to get close to animals, and everything you need to know to how to hunt in the alpine. We do that over a 2-day weekend. It's tons of fun. So if you're looking for that support to learn how to hunt in the alpine and you want some tips, there's 2 or 3 of us who've spent a lot of time in the alpine kind of hanging out with our group, and I think we still have 1 or 2 spots left that you can jump on if you're interested. So go ahead and message us directly through Instagram or on our website if you're interested. But yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to get to and share. I'm interested if there's any questions about or discussion on tips for meat care.
Yeah, a couple of questions. So when you're doing the river cooling system and you've got your meat in the plastic bags, then you submerge them. Are you pulling them out like every day to check them and then hang them for a little while, or do you just leave them in the river for 4 or 5 days or whatever?
You know what? That's a great question. Sorry, I was going to stop sharing here so I can get this thing to cooperate. That's a good question. So in doing the research on this and kind of talking to my butcher buddies and such that sort of worked in this world a long time. So Uli, who I deal with at Sumas Meats, is a good friend of mine and a great butcher. He says, just go one way or the other. Like if you're going to submerge your meat and keep it in plastic and keep it in the water, like you're probably best, like if the temperature, like once the temperatures are down, like it's in the water, it's staying below 6 degrees. Like don't take it in and out. Don't take it in and out, because all you're doing is you're exposing it to more bacteria, more temperature variation. Yeah. Like it's that up and down of temperature that's going to it's going to cause you problems, right? If you keep the temperature nice and even, obviously you want to stick your nose in it and make sure nothing's going off. But if it seems like it's tracking in the right direction, it does seem to, there's the recommendation from the butchers is to just go with it. Now, where I would be a little bit like, I'd like to get to a place where I've got very dry meat that is now in a bag submerged in coldness, right? So if you're still fighting moisture, like if you haven't been able to get the moisture out of the meat, like you haven't been able to expose it to wind, you haven't been able to get there's enough time of it outside of the plastic to drain the majority of the blood out and let the moisture go. I think I'd like to get that out of there before, if I have the option. But in our option, we had no option for that. It was 20 degrees overnight.
No choice.
There's no choice. So our only choice was to keep it submerged. Whereas on that bear hunt I just showed, like we had a pretty cool evening, like of 6 degrees, maybe 8 degrees. So, and there was a nice breeze through there, at least for part of the day. So why not get it out, get it in the game bags, let some vapor out, but I knew it was going to heat up in the day. So then it goes in the water, and then once we're heading home and I know that we're, hours from a freezer, I could probably pull it back out. But if I was going to leave it for 2 or 3 days, I think I just leave it in the creek.
Right on. So I guess in a perfect scenario, say you're in the backcountry sheep hunting and you kill a ram, you don't have a creek up in the alpine, you stay up there overnight, because normally you got to deal, if you got a cape, you're going to have to deal with that cape the next day at the very latest, right? You've got to get after that. So I guess in a perfect scenario, you shoot your ram, you have a tree, maybe in the timber, you can hang the game bags or whatever, you get it cooled off, pack everything down, deal with your cape, pack everything back down to the river. And then if you've got dry bags or garbage bags or those food safe bags, then you could start that whole river cooling system and be, kind of be one and done with it for the next few days, right? That would be probably a really good scenario.
Yeah, that would be kind of ideal if, because you got to manage, it's lots to manage, and it also becomes a bit of a situation where you're, it's a bit of triage too. Like we didn't take our capes out on our sheep hunt because we knew that we weren't going to get them out. Like
you made that choice, one or the other, right?
One or the other, yeah. And we also, Jenny and I, physically we're going to be taxed because we had to go back up and over a mountain to get into camp, and we knew, we started out that day at 3:30 in the morning, and we got back to camp at 7 at night. And between the two of us, it was all we could do to get, to throw on another 20 pounds of hide. It may have just been and we probably could have done
much.
it. And in retrospect, I wish I could have found a way to do it, but I was so focused on the meat care that I just felt like, and I knew that I wasn't going to get a full mount. Like that's not my jam, but I really wish I had brought the hide out and made it into a rug, like it's a throw rug for around the house, and I regret that. But I didn't have that in my head at the time. I just didn't think of that. I was just thinking that I didn't really want a full rug, so I thought, well, I'd be packing it out for another hunter to make it into I would
Shoulder
pass
mount.
it on to somebody who had a pelt or had their hide slip on them, and I would pass it on to them because it was a decent ram with fairly heavy bases, which I know was hard to find the ones with the girth and their anyways, and I was like, oh, it's not worth that, like to whether to
for
sacrifice
sure.
the
Yeah,
meat.
like you said, you had to make a choice, and 35 degrees, if that temperature is just insane, and luckily you didn't have insects, because I've experienced it. I think Blake and I we shot a whitetail, or actually it was my other son Dallas and I shot a whitetail in the early season, and it was super hot in the afternoon, and we were at a river bottom out in the Kootenays where we ended up shooting this deer. And within 10 seconds, we were infested with hornets and mosquitoes, and all of a sudden you start panicking and you're freaking out about the meat and you're working fast. So I can imagine on the side of a mountain at 35-degree heat, you're just thinking, do everything by the book legally and get that meat out of there as fast as you can, right?
Yeah. Well, we had bugs, man. We had that video of Jenny with no sound was just like, if you could hear it, just all mosquitoes and just like
humming.
hammering in her face. And she's just like, this is not type 2 fun. This is like, we're not fun at all, but we're almost done. It's great.
Awesome. So, well, that's great. I don't see a ton of questions. I know we're going to get lots of feedback like we have. I'm just going through my questions here. So what do you got planned this year, Dylan? Are you going back up the mountain for sheep again?
Oh God, that's such a good question. I was just on the fence of pulling the pin. We have a caribou hunt planned with some friends of ours, and my wife and I and our friend Jay and Ashley, our friends Jay and Ashley, we're gonna fly out of the Cassiars and look for caribou and goats. And we're kind of a little bit overwhelmed right now with like challenges with timing and stuff like that. So we're like, oh, we should maybe it's a responsible thing to like postpone until next year. And we were like thinking about that. And then this morning we both woke up. We're like, you know what? If we don't go, you don't go. Like you got to go. Like you don't get to
exactly.
I've made this mistake once or twice before. I usually don't make this mistake. I don't want to make it again, but it's like you only get so many of these hunts in a lifetime, and if you don't go, then you can always make it. They're hard to do. That they're physically challenging. They take a lot of planning. They take a lot of resources. They take a lot of your holiday. Like there's so many things you can say, oh, I can't do it, but there's only so many opportunities to get up into these alpine areas, these sacred wilderness areas that we have. We're so fortunate in BC to have them and have access to them and be able to go experience this with a $40 tag over the counter and potentially have they're all dream hunts, whether you kill something or you don't. And yeah, it's just like, it's so special. So yeah, so I think we've kind of let some of that stress go, and we're just going to go for it. So that we're start out with that, and then probably can't really imagine going through a season without elk hunting. And then we got a moose draw. So we'll get some hunting in, and excited about hunting locally here. I'm on the Sunshine Coast, and we've been kind of really figuring out these blacktails around here and kind of getting into it. So hunting locally, and then for EatWild, we're kind of doing. We've got our hunter field skills workshop next weekend. We got a butchering workshop coming up in Abbotsford at Uli's shop there at the Sumas Meats in early August, and then probably step back a little bit for some of the actual physical stuff, just because I'll be hunting and working and other things for a bit. But you can always, really hoping that these online courses find their way to folks, and they can pick and choose what they need for the upcoming hunt and learn a bit more. So. Yeah.
Well, yeah, for sure. So what we'd like to do is we'll start getting all of your schedule of events and things that you're working on, and we'll post them we've got an event section, we've got hunter resources section, and this is a great segment. It's been awesome having you on, and we'd like to get you back on a frequent basis. Work with you on co-promoting each other's platforms and programs and stuff. We're going to be doing a similar series to this on elk hunting, and 2 or 3 interviews of key people. So maybe we can get you back on there and do a little preview for your elk workshops and stuff. That'd be fun.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll be thinking elk. I just got my new been working on my new call. I don't know if you heard of these guys Slayer calls. They have I can't use a mouth read very well. I get not so much a gag reflex, it's just that the buzzing in my mouth I'm super ticklish, like ridiculously ticklish. And I go into like tickle mode, and I can't produce consistent bugles. But they've got this external sort of bugling system that you kind of use your same back pressure and air concept that you would use with the mouth diaphragm, but it's external, so it doesn't cause the tickles or the gag reflex. And so I'm excited. So I've been playing with that, and actually the fellow there, Bill Ayer from Slayer Calls, is on our podcast, so we'll be talking elk next month on the EatWild podcast, and happy to come in and talk elk because I've been and just wrapping up my elk presentation. So so I'm excited about it all.
Well, that's great. Well, like I said, we'll start putting your schedule up on the platform and try and push stuff on our socials towards you as well. So
much appreciated.
Awesome.
Okay,
well, thank you very much for taking the time, Dylan. It's been great, super informative, and Blake will put some notes and some links and stuff in the show notes, and we will get this. It'll be posted on the platform probably in a day or two. And then it'll also be on our YouTube channel, and we're going to roll it and flip it onto our podcast. So we can actually send you a copy of it too, if you want to use it for your stuff as well.
Sure.
Happy to do that as well. So anyway, we're going to sign off, and thanks again, Dylan. Great having you on, buddy.
Yeah, right on. That was a lot of fun. Really well done. I look forward to coming back. We'll see everybody. And thanks for listening, everybody else there. Bye.
Thanks.